Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Game Changers for Government Contractors. I am your host, Michael LeJeune. If you are brand new to the podcast, I highly recommend you go and check out a bunch of the other episodes. There's a lot of great guests on here from industry, other companies that are trying to do the exact same thing you're doing with a lot of lessons learned and that kind of thing. And I also would love it if you enjoy the podcast, if you go and rate it on whatever platform you're listening to, thumbs it up, put a star by it, whatever it is it asks for you, just write a recommendation that helps get the podcast out there. So today we're going to be talking with my good friend and one of our business coaches, Rich Earnest. We're going to be talking about products. We talk a lot about services on this podcast. So I wanted Rich to come on and kind of dig deep into the product side of things with us. But before we jump in and talk products, Rich, welcome to the podcast. Take a minute, tell everybody a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Thank you, Mike. So been with I think RSM Federal now for about 3 years as a government sales coach. So really excited about that milestone, and been in this business over 20 years. So started as a government contractor myself with the VA, 2004. Won a total of nine contracts. Sold our company at the end of that journey, 2012, and started helping folks with their government sales plan shortly after. Uh, if I was to say, what do I specialize in? So putting together government sales strategy, looking at a GSA schedule and figuring out how to sell on it is a big strategy of ours, because that's a big gap that needs filling, I believe, in the market. A lot of people say they'll give you a GSA schedule, but don't really have any strategy to tell you how
Right.
to win on it. And if you're looking, if you want to throw a third in there, just because of my experience in the healthcare field with my first wins, I do have some knowledge about the federal health sector, and can help companies navigate that as well.
Yeah. And you have so much knowledge on the product side. That's why we're talking about that today. And I think it would be good to kind of jump in and talk a little bit about some of the categories here real quick, because that is something that we get a lot of questions about. And before we dive into that, I'll say we're talking products. We're not talking middleman strategy. That's not what we're talking about here today. That is not the strategy we promote. It's not a strategy we advise. So I just want to get that out of the gate right up front. Even though we're talking products, we're not talking middleman strategy. There's some other things that we'll get into, but from your perspective, which government agencies do you see as the biggest buyers in specific product categories like IT, healthcare, things like that? And maybe you can kind of break that down for us in some way.
Sure. So overall, not a surprise. The three biggest buyers of products are DoD based departments. That's Navy, Air Force, Army. That is not a surprise. But if you look at the non military, we're looking at a State Department. We're looking at VA, and the Social Security Administration. Which, I mean, all those are large departments. They're large entities. That's not a surprise. If you wanted to go a little bit further down the lane, one of the biggest ones, if you're looking overall as far as products, it's shipbuilding, which, I mean, that's it's very large in spend, but as far as who can provide the services, it's very small. So you really want to start looking. You really want to start looking at smaller spends to get a real feel for what some of those
Hmm.
top ones are. One of them actually is drugs and biologics. So
Really?
those are like your immunizations, your other products like that. That's a large spend. Is if you're looking at categories, specific categories, broken down. IT is a big one as a whole, but if you look at the specific categories by themselves, so IT software for uh, PCs, because it gets really specific. They look smaller, but if you look at IT as a whole, it's a large spend as well, and that makes sense. Just about everything's modernized on some type of computer system now, so that makes sense.
Yeah. And then even gets into the computer systems and hardware and microphones and
Mm-hmm.
cameras and gadgets that we have all over our desk,
Mm-hmm.
headphones. I think I said that one. Just there's so many different product categories that there are. Um, when people start to look at this, I think one of their big concerns when they initially get in the market is looking at like set asides and things like that and saying, well, how can I compete if I don't have certain set asides or things like that? Do you see that as a massive hindrance to compete in these categories? Do you have some thoughts around set asides that they need when they're coming in?
Mm-hmm. So I definitely have some thoughts around that. So overall, I mean, people think you need to have a set aside to compete, and this may be true if you really drill down to a specific product bought by a specific agency. That could be the case, but overall, all the dollars obligated in 2024, 25% of those were set aside contracts for traditional small businesses.
Hmm.
25%.
So they're just small,
Yeah,
nothing
they're just
special about it.
small. Combined, all the other ones, so it's SDVOSB, 8A, VOSB, woman owned, all those combined only reached 7%.
Mm,
So it's not as important as you think it is. In
yeah.
fact, I'll throw another stat out there. We'll just talk about SDVOSB. Last time I checked, there were 30,000 companies registered as an SDVOSB on SBA, but only 3,000 of them won a contract in 2024, 2023.
10%.
Yeah, yeah. So obviously, it's not the I guess the wild card or that
Yeah.
is going to give you the contract. All it is just it's something nice. It helps market. It's a balancing differentiator. If you're wanting to sell this specific product to the VA, then maybe it makes sense. But if you're looking at a larger strategy, it's a small play.
Yeah. I had run some numbers for a client a while back, and I think it was an IT category, and the spend for like the time frame I pulled up was like say like 1.4 billion. And the majority of that was full and open. Then it got to, I want to say like 800 million as like all small.
Mm-hmm.
And then it dropped from like 800 million to, I want to say 100 or less in like 8A or whatever the
Mm-hmm.
category was.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was ridiculous how much of it was just in small business, not one of these particular categories. And then it dropped off from there. It went from like the 100 million to like 8 million in
Mm-hmm.
SDVOSB or WSB or whatever the category was. And I've done that for a lot of products. I've done it for a lot of services. And when I do that, it's a very similar, look and feel, like the
Mm-hmm.
similar numbers and percentages. And so that it really does kind of blow out the water that you have to have a specific one of these. I mean, you and I both know when it comes to the VA, they really want you to have that SDVOSB. Your
Mm-hmm.
VOB doesn't even matter. They
Mm-hmm.
really want you to have SDVOSB. They want you to be service disabled. That's just the bottom line with the VA. But there's a lot of these agencies. It's like you can still do a lot of business regardless of what you have, don't have, that kind of thing. You can still be competitive. And I think that is really good for the market. And it's a positive because anybody can break in and do some work. So that's a good one. Um, the next kind of thing down the rabbit hole is always, or it seems like it's always GSA.
Mm-hmm.
That's the one where every time I turn around, we'll get a phone call and somebody's like, well, I need a GSA schedule. Like, why do you need a GSA schedule? Because you need a GSA schedule, right? Like that's their whole justification
Mm-hmm.
is because you need one. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like, well, just like a certification, that doesn't mean you're going to get any contracts. And I think
Mm-hmm.
we've run the numbers on GSA so much, you've probably done a little bit more than I have. I think it's just slightly over 50% of GSA schedule holders of all time have never won a contract at
Mm-hmm.
all. And
Mm-hmm.
then the ones that didn't meet their goal is a fairly significant chunk too. So
Mm-hmm.
as I just throw that out there, do you see any differences in the product side where GSA is one of those things where, man, if you're going to sell products, the numbers don't necessarily line up with what Mike just said. And if you're going to sell products, man, I really think you need the GSA schedule. Or is it still, in your opinion, it's really based on who you want to sell to and what you're selling to.
Definitely. So if you look at the entire spend for products in 2024, it's around 186 million dollars or billion, excuse me, dollars were spent on products by all government agencies for all products. If you look at the GSA spend, it's about 6 billion. So that's a small number
It's a really
compared
small
to the
number.
186 billion.
Yeah.
Now, don't get me wrong. I mean, like I said, we were talking about shipbuilding earlier. I mean, some of these things are huge spends, so you take that into consideration. But you have to take that in mind. You really got to dig down to your product service code or your
Mm.
keywords because so for example, let's take 7A20. That's for IT telecom application development software. So this is like your SharePoint or
Hmm.
you know, those types of software licenses. It's not developing. It's not a service. It's a product. You have to buy a license. 194 million was bought on the open market for those for those licenses in 2024, but 184 million was bought off GSA. So that might make sense that you have a GSA schedule,
Yeah.
but do some more digging. They might buy more off of NASA Soup. That's another place where you can sell, or CIOCS is another contract. So I've just named two contract vehicles that aren't GSA. Not sure what the numbers are for that, but they could be higher than GSA. The only thing about GSA that's more of an advantage is you can get a GSA schedule anytime. you,
Mm.
you don't have to wait for an on ramping period. You may say, well, yeah, NASA Soup's buying $300 million. We got to get on NASA Soup. Well, they just finished their on ramping period, so you're going to have to wait another 5 years.
Yeah.
So you might want to focus on GSA for now and do what you can, and then focus also on those open market opportunities and try to get as many of those over to GSA. But everything I've just described to you is very active, very proactive strategy. It's not just put it on GSA and wait. And I think that's the biggest part. So even though I just quoted to you that it might make sense to get a GSA schedule with the numbers for this IT category, that is with the understanding that you are going to actively sell, not
Yeah.
just sit back and wait for an order.
Yeah. So if you were a product company, or if you just started a new product company, where would you even start with this? Because there's so many tools and systems and things we can look at. I think we can get really granular at analyzing spending data and looking at forecasts and all that kind of stuff. Where But where would you start if you were starting a new product company, regardless of what you sold, from a research and a strategy perspective? Where would you focus your time and energy up front?
So personally, I would look for areas where I if I had no dog in the hunt, like I had no idea what I was going to sell. First of all, I hope nobody really starts from that space.
There are a
Hopefully it
lot.
will be that's going to be tough because you have no relationships.
Yeah.
Okay? So I would start somewhere where you have some type of relationship with somebody. Even if it's an old friend, it could be a if it's products, it could be a colleague from the past. You really have to build good relationships with your supplier, your manufacturer. This idea of just looking on SAM for opportunities and then trying to go out and get a quote after the fact, you're not going to get good pricing. So if you worked in IT in the past, it would make sense that you would make relationships with software license vendors like maybe CDW, or if you want to go down to the level of Z, like a specific publisher, software publisher, or like Microsoft or whatever. That's a big that's a big bucket right there of products and providers. But you got to start somewhere. Don't just say, "Oh, well, they're buying the most of that, so that makes sense. I should go out there." We'll also look and see how many competitors you might have too, and what was the average number of offers for each bid in that space. If it's 20, then that's not a place you want to go. You want to go a place where there's 2 or 3 people, consistently submitting for
Yeah.
an offer, so you'll be competitive and that you have a chance. But let's say you've figured out what you want to do. Then the next step is, and you have a relationship with a manufacturer. So you already have I would focus almost all of my time on, um, first figuring out who buys what I sell, and specifically on the simplified acquisition threshold, um, areas, and start soliciting those contracting officers. Uh, very interesting, um, a very interesting, uh, stat that we got going on here is, um, yeah, I'm just looking for it real quick in my notes. Over 300,000 contracts totaling $4.3 billion were awarded under the simplified acquisition threshold on the open market. And
Wow.
of these, of the number I just gave you, none of them were competed on SAM.
Wow. So was that like in the last year, last 3 years?
So that's 24.
That's
Just
just
about
24.
everything. I'm keeping 24 as kind of our
Or benchmark here.
reference here.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Or reference. Yeah.
um, so what
That's
does
a
that
lot.
tell you? Yeah, they're
There's a
not
lot going on in simplified acquisition.
right, and they're not on SAM. So how do you know about them if they're not on a contract vehicle and they're not on SAM? How do you know about them? Relationships.
Yeah.
Relationships is how you know about these.
Or you find out after the fact when you run a report and you see that it was already done.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But you want to be ahead of that, right?
Right.
So
Right.
yeah. So you got to check SAM every day over your morning cup of coffee. There might be one that slips through, might be a couple that slips through, but for the
But
most
there's a lot
part,
that aren't.
yeah, you got to have a marketing strategy to these contracting officers, and hopefully you'll be able to break through and start selling to the end user, your product and your capabilities, um, and that takes some more time,
Yeah.
but you're going to be a lot more successful in the long run than adapting this. Oh, I'll just sell anything and everything and just get a quote and mark it up and I'm good. Well,
Yeah.
that ain't going to work.
Right.
So,
So given that, what are some suggestions you have for effective ways to introduce your company to those contracting officers?
okay. So, I think you said this, and just about everybody on our team said this. First and foremost, don't lead with your set aside.
Yeah.
Okay. We just saw there that only 7% of products are bought on a set aside contract. So
Yep.
that obviously isn't going to be isn't going to be your saving grace. If it's by email, come out right away and say you've been doing your research, and that you
Yeah.
buy what we sell. Talk about your value. How many software licenses have you sold to other agencies, and which agencies did you support? If they bought off GSA in the past, make sure you list your GSA number if you have a GSA schedule. Same with a phone call. Get straight to the point. Ask. There should be a call to action, some type of call to action in email. Are they available for a capabilities brief? Don't ask when it's convenient for you, or if you have time, say, I'd like to have a capabilities brief with you, and give them a date and a time. Does this work? Does this time and date work? And a lot of times they'll say, no, it doesn't. If they respond, no, it doesn't, but this time works, because the goal isn't to keep it more open-ended. It's to be more direct and have a specific ask. The other call to action is to ask a question, but only do one question, right? Don't have 20 questions, and make sure that that's a
Right.
question that you can't find the answer to yourself.
Right.
Don't waste their time. And if it's a question about the product itself that the contracting officer probably wouldn't be able to understand, they'll be able to submit that quickly to the program manager. Just that one question.
Yeah.
And that could be a way to connect.
Well, that brings up a really good point there. You're talking about program managers. So you've got your contracting officers. They're running their simplified acquisitions, however they're running their simplified acquisitions. But then you've got program managers, project managers, grassroots level people. I mean, I remember when I was in the Army, we had a credit card.
Mm-hmm.
I had a There was a E8 that I worked for. He had a credit card.
Hmm.
He could just go buy stuff, and he did all the time. Like there were things that we needed, instead of sending that somewhere up the food chain, he would just go to Office Depot and just buy what we needed. I mean, I can't tell
Hmm.
you how many runs I made to Office Depot or Walmart or somewhere else. We just bought stuff with a credit card. So
Hmm.
how do you identify those folks that are the rogue rebels out there just buying stuff with a purchase card, and like they're making up a decent amount of spend?
Hmm. Yeah. So in my younger days, I would say run a FOIA on who all the purchase card holders are in that agency. That gives you a huge list, and you don't know if they're buying what you sell or not. So I don't know if I'd
Yeah.
really recommend that. What I have found effective is one, if you're willing to make the investment, I use the LinkedIn Sales Navigator tool a lot
Hmm.
because you can get a little bit more, you can dig down a little bit more and get a little bit more detail. So you can go by the agency. You can also put in your title. So if you're selling medical equipment, you know that one of the biggest stakeholders in medical equipment being bought by just about any agency is nursing. Nursing is going to be a
Hmm.
big person. So you
Okay.
start looking for nurse managers. You look for maybe not the chief nursing officer, but looking for nurse managers for primary care, nurse managers. That's just an example, and start reaching out to them in some fashion. It could just be connecting on LinkedIn and then just gradually working your way up to calling or emailing them. That's a tactic I've used. I've also went, and if you can't do it for every agency, but you'd be surprised how many directories are out there on in Excel sheets just out
Yeah.
there publicly. I can't believe it. So if you do a quick search, if you're savvy with your Google searches, and you can say, uh, in quotes directory, in quotes .xlsx, in quotes agent, the agency you're looking for, you might find an Excel spreadsheet and it has all their names and titles. And so you can discern by their title, this might be somebody, but it takes a little bit more work to do that.
Hmm.
But maybe a small business office might give you a lead, but they are usually very protective of those people and their names and their titles. But if you continue to show up and show that you're just a one and done meeting, you go back to that small business office, you build trust with that small business office, you build trust with the contracting officer, um, then they'll introduce you to the program manager, and so that next buy that could be some type of micro purchase that may happen for you. So
Yeah.
it's all those things. It's not one.
Yeah.
There isn't one silver bullet. You know.
Yeah. I think that's one of the biggest takeaways people need to understand when they're selling anything to anyone, is there really aren't any silver bullets in this. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
or there isn't a silver bullet. There are some silver bullets. But it's like you've got 6 or 8 of those that you're working at any given time. And I know when I'm doing research, which I love to do research, I think I'm pretty good at it. When I'm doing research, I may have to use 6, 7, 8 strategies to find what I'm looking for. And then there's times I don't find it, and I just got to move on to the next agency or the next person I'm
Mm-hmm.
trying to find, or whatever it may be. And I do think people get too hung up on saying, well, I need to find out who the person is who's got the credit card at this office. I'm like, well, how long have you been working on that?
Mm-hmm.
And if the answer is a really long time, you've put in 2, 3, 4 hours and you still can't find it. You've made some phone calls, you sent some emails and you still can't find it. Maybe you go to the next name, because there are thousands of people with credit cards. There are thousands of contracting officers. And when people get stuck trying to get a phone number for one person, that's when they stop doing the job. And it's one thing if you're like, look, I have to get a hold of Rich because Rich manages this particular program. And at the VA, this program is buying 80% of what I sell. Okay, that makes sense for you to continue looking for Rich. But if this is just one more person, like you got to keep going. And that's probably one of the things that I would tell anybody that's doing this is you just got to keep going. You got to keep talking to more people. There's a direct correlation between how many people you talk to and what your income is.
Mm-hmm.
And if that
Yeah.
number is low, your income's going to be low.
Mm-hmm.
And if we can just get that mindset into more people, I think that's where more people are going to be more successful in here, because you can even screw it up. But if you talk to enough people, they always say that a broken clock's still going to be right twice a day, right? Like the old, the regular with the analog ones. Cause it's still going to be right twice a day. So even if you're not good at it, you're still going to get somewhere by making sure you have enough volume in all this. Cause if you don't have enough volume, it doesn't matter what you do. It's probably not
No,
going to be good. So,
no, I had a call yesterday with a gentleman who sold paper, so like paper plate tableware.
okay.
It was specialized. It was more eco friendly, and we just did a little bit of research together. I think the government spent over only $8 million on
Hmm.
that category on GSA. So I said that's probably the juice probably isn't worth your squeeze
Right.
on in this.
That's
And
a
I
good
just
one.
said what I would suggest is going to look for caterers that have to provide that as part of their contract and start looking for those instead of selling it directly.
Yeah.
So that was my
That's an
take.
interesting one you bring up. I actually talked to a guy years ago that had a company that also had a similar product. I don't remember the name of the product, but they, in there, it was paper plates and bowls and cups and all that stuff. And embedded in all of the product were seeds,
Mm,
so that when the things started to degrade in the soil, it would produce grass or what, like, I don't know what
mm-hmm,
kind of seeds were in it. And I was like, man, this is such a niche product. And
mm-hmm,
you're like, and the army's trying to get the cheapest whatever plates because they're out in the field, and they don't want, flowers sprouting up and doing what, like, they just don't care. And so sometimes when you look at this, like you said, the juice isn't worth the squeeze. It's not
mm-hmm,
worth chasing this because the government just doesn't care, or
mm-hmm.
like they don't have that's just not on their radar. You've got to build a case for them to
Right.
use something like that. I talked to another one, and I think the name of the product and the company might be the same. So if you're listening to this, you're getting a little promo here. It was meal cubes was the thought, and it was kind of like out of the Jetsons,
Okay.
where they had these little meal cubes, and in this one cube, it would have anywhere from, I don't know, 500 to 1,000 calories or whatever it is. And they were like, this is a great idea for special forces and whatever. And I'm like, well, maybe. I mean, it's giving them enough calories, but, does that guy who's out there running 12 miles want to pop a thing the size of a sugar cube? And is that like, that hit the spot? Or do they want to sit down and eat a steak or something, or even an MRE because it feels more filling, or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. And I'm like, you got to push this uphill a bit. It's a good idea, but this market may not be right for you right now.
Right.
And I like to hear that more, because I think there's too many people that get romanced by the government, and they're like, oh, well, there's money, and there's money, but there may not be money for you and what you sell. At least not yet, because not enough people know you exist, understand the product, what you're trying to do. But they all understand Microsoft. They all understand Adobe. They all understand SharePoint. They all
Mm-hmm.
understand, um, you know, Evernote, or
Mm-hmm.
Monday.com, or whatever the tool. They get those things. And so it's easy for them to make a purchase on that. But you call up
Mm-hmm.
a contracting officer and try to sell him meal cubes, and he's like, dude,
Right. Right.
yeah,
Well, and for all those people out there that do sell products, make sure that you understand. So if somebody calls you from a company that provides GSA schedules, and they say based on your NAICS code, the government bought this, and this is, the only step between you and winning this money is getting a GSA schedule. Understand, I mean, their research is, if they're doing any research and they're just seeing your name and giving you a phone call, is not specialized. So
yeah,
before you do anything with the GSA schedule, take some time and do your own research to make sure that happens. Make sure that it makes sense that they are actually buying. The second part of that is, if If a small business representative says to you, you need to get a GSA schedule, and then you might be able to do some business with this agency. I've heard that a lot.
Yeah.
Do they know exactly what you sell, and do they know that they buy what you sell on GSA? Make sure you know that, and don't just take one person's word for it.
Hmm.
Because I know they don't mean any harm, but they're speaking broadly.
Yeah.
You need to focus on what you sell before you make that business decision.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. Um, we don't necessarily have time to get into pricing and things like that because I know there's an art and science to pricing and making sure you are getting the best, or the government's getting the best price, you're getting the most profit. So that's that whole price to win strategy right there. But talk to me as we close. There's two things I want to hit. One is, in this product area, is it worth it in your opinion to chase sources sought and RFIs? That's number one. And number two, you can close this out with anything we've missed.
Okay, so sources sought RFIs. Uh, I've been in situations where that has heavily benefited us responding to the sources sought. I've been in situations where they thanked us for submitting. They said they would take this into consideration for their RFP, and then within 30 minutes release the RFP with nothing that
That's
we
funny.
suggested. Okay, so it depends. I always say submit. I always say submit because there's been times where they said, yeah, well, we're really looking for this specific brand that we're talking about. But next thing you know, we're proposing an equal and we won. So
Hmm.
never give up, but just understand that you're not going to have a 90% success rate doing that. You may have a 20 or 30% success rate doing that. But that's just one part of your strategy.
Yeah.
That's not your whole strategy. That's just one part. So, and then if you're talking brand name or equal, something actually comes out on the street and it's brand name or equal, and you can fulfill the requirements, then submit a quote. It doesn't
Yeah.
take that long. I mean, we're only taking a few hours to submit a quote. It's not like
Right.
putting together a 40-page proposal.
Right.
Submit the quote. You might be surprised. You might get the bid just because nobody else submitted. That happens.
Yeah. Yeah. That's absolutely true. And before you close up with the anything we missed stuff, you brought up a good point there that I want to throw out there and get your thoughts on it. We're really focused on buying American made products now.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a direction we're going to keep going with the country. I had somebody actually email me the other day and say, "Hey, is there a list of products from China that the government buys a lot of that I can resell? Do you have a list like that?" And so between that comment and just the Buy America Act and where we're going with that, can you give folks a little bit of insight on making sure their products are made in America, or when there are no options for made in America, like how to deal with that? Because I know that is a concern for a lot of people. They're going, well, I can't sell to this market because our products aren't made in America. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, I mean, if they are so like here's one example. I see a lot of these. I won't name the name of the manufacturer, but a manufacturer that makes places where you can mount your computer and your keyboards to a wall or something like that
Okay,
in
like
a
wall mounts and
yeah,
stuff.
wall mounts and stuff. They're all made in China, but they are spec'd specifically in the solicitation. So how do you get around that? So in that case, if you're selling that and they're asking for it, I wouldn't sweat it too much. Um, but just just make sure you read the solicitation. Make sure that you ask the manufacturer for documentation that this is an American made product, because let's face it,
Mm-hmm.
every piece of this thing that we're making in America has pieces that aren't. So just
Right.
make sure that it is, and call that out in this list, in your response, that this is made in America. So
Or
the
assembled.
contracting officer knows. Now the contracting officer
Yeah.
still may ignore you and get the lower price, but that's not on you anymore. Just make sure
Right.
you're doing right, because you don't want to be in a
Yeah,
situation
absolutely.
where you misrepresent what you're selling, and it might get you into some trouble.
Yeah. And that's where people don't necessarily read what they sign. Just like, when's the
Right.
last time you ever read a license agreement that popped up on your computer? No one's ever read one of those.
Mm-mm.
I mean, you could put anything in there. And people sign contracts without reading what they're agreeing to. And
Mm-hmm.
in there are the clauses, and you will have things like you certify or that your products are made in America or
Mm-hmm.
whatever the thing is, right? So understanding what you're signing, I think, is really important so that you don't sign anything like that. Josh has said before where if there's something like that into a contract, he'll print it out, scratch through it, and initial it, that the whole this is made in America, initial it, and then sign the document. Be like, hey, I'm
Mm-hmm.
not signing to that part. I'm just signing
Mm-hmm.
everything else.
Yeah.
So
If you still want to submit, just make sure you're saying real clearly, I can't support this, or I
yep,
can't
yep,
fulfill this.
yep. This
So,
particular requirement. No, that's really
yeah.
good. So to close up, one of the questions that I know we haven't hit on is: are there specific buying trends in products, whether it's specific months, quarters, into fiscal year, things like that, that people should be aware of?
That's an interesting question, Mike, because is it everybody thinks that this fourth quarter is a like
It's
this
gangbusters.
yeah, it's gangbusters, it's a unicorn. It's just that's when you have to really get to work. If you look at the actual spend, there is an uptick in spending in fourth quarter, but it's a small uptick. If you look at the actual amount of contracts awarded, there's a bigger uptick. But if you look, it's still pretty even across the board. So my point to you is you should be selling all the time,
All year long.
all year
Yeah.
long. Especially, this is a tangent, but even when the agency has no money to buy, there's a few agencies with my clients, they're not buying right now because they don't have the money. But that doesn't mean you stop selling.
Right.
You got to keep selling. Even when the people say, we don't have the money. I said, I understand, but you will someday. And we're here when you need
Yeah.
us.
We got to be positioning now. So,
Right.
and it's a good point you bring up, because I think when I've looked at the numbers over the last at least decade, if not 2 decades,
Mm-hmm.
on average, the fourth quarter spend is roughly 28% of the government's budget,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
roughly 28%, which is a minor uptick
Yeah.
in the grand scheme of things. The interesting thing is the volume of transactions that you were talking about. So you see a lot more transactions, but the dollar spend is only 28%. And if
Mm-hmm.
it was even, it'd be 25. If it was spread even over all 4 quarters, so it's not that big of an uptick, which kind of gets rid of that myth. And that is a generality, because I have noticed certain product or service categories at certain agencies where there is an uptick and it's significant.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember what it was. We had a client a while back, and he had come to us in like March, and I said, well, this is a good time and a bad time. It's good because I just pulled the data on yours, and 75% of the spend that your agency you need to sell to happens in March
Mm-hmm.
every single year. So we've got a year to plan for this.
Mm-hmm.
but overall, when I'm talking to people, that's not the case. It's usually fairly flat, with
Mm-hmm.
maybe a minor uptick in Q4. So,
Yeah.
but there are those rare times, and I think you need to know that as a business owner, so you can say, oh, well, why is that? Like, oh, well, that's typically when they renew this contract, or when these
Mm-hmm.
particular contracts get renewed, this series of contracts, or there's usually a reason why you're going to see that uptick in
Mm-hmm.
whatever quarter it is. But that'll help you understand, so that you can set good expectations with your team of, hey, we're probably going to be selling uphill the next 6, 8, 9 months, but this is coming, and we
Right.
need to be aware of that.
Right.
So yeah, yeah, we could probably talk for
Oh yeah.
days on the
Yeah.
product side of things. Takeaway I have from this: do your research, talk to people like yourself who understand this. You've been around it long enough. you can help them make some decisions, because to me, there are dozens of little micro decisions, and then there's some major decisions that have to be made, like GSA, like NASA soup, like what agencies, what strategy we're going to have. There's some minor and major decisions people need to make in order to have a good strategy to
Mm-hmm.
sell anything in the government. But
Mm-hmm.
when you're doing products, it's usually, there's so much data
Mm-hmm.
that it really helps. So
Yeah,
so
you got to
yeah,
have the data, but just
gotta
make
have the
sure
data.
that you're not staying in the data all day and just, oh,
Yeah,
that's
don't spend
cool,
a
that's
ton of time.
cool, that's
Don't get
cool.
romanced by the data.
Yeah, there you go.
That's a good one. Well, hey man, thank you for coming on and talking about this. As always, it's a pleasure. And for anybody that, whether you're selling products or services, you're in healthcare, you're not in healthcare, you are looking to get a GSA schedule, or trying to get on any other vehicle, Rich is your guy. I mean, he's a great guy to work with on our team.
Thank you.
We've helped him, or he's helped our clients win a lot of contracts. Rich, you currently hold the record in our company for getting a GSA schedule. I think 2 months is mind boggling fast how that happened. I don't know that we'll ever see that again, but I think your record was 4 months before that. But
Yeah.
you know, that's one of the things that I know a lot of our clients have really been appreciative of, is just how you help them navigate the GSA process, even post award, because most people, they get their schedule and then they fail. And so, and
Mm-hmm.
you've been able to help them figure that out. So thank you. And again, if you want to reach out to Rich, his contact info is in the system. You can reach out to me or him. You can grab him on LinkedIn, reference a podcast if you would. And again, thanks, Rich. We really appreciate having you today.
Thank you, Mike.